Welcome to Cracked Open, a podcast about life, love, loss, and the truths we discover along the way. Together, we'll explore the struggles that shape us, the lessons we carry, and the hope that keeps us moving forward. This is more than stories. It's honesty. It's healing. It's real. Let's get started. And now your host, Glenn Nunes.
What is more important to you, being right or being a safe place to land? Because when someone you love shatters their own life, your ego will scream for you to say, "I told you so." Your pride will beg you to throw stones. But your spirit knows that being right will never heal a relationship. Only being a safe fortress will. Because sooner or later, someone you love is going to disappoint you. Someone you love is going to make a decision you never would have made. So, the name of this episode is The Grace in Not Judging. What if the greatest gift you could ever give someone wasn't advice? What if it wasn't the perfect words, or the perfect Bible verse, or proving you were right all along? What if the greatest gift you could give another human being was simply this, a place where they don't have to pretend anymore? Because one day, someone you love may make the biggest mistake of their life. They may break their own heart, damage relationships, lose everything, and finally come home carrying nothing but regret. And in that moment, they already know they failed. They won't need another judge. They'll need someone who remembers what grace feels like. So today, I want to talk about that, the grace in not judging. I've spent a lot of time judging people, and I spent even more time assuming people were judging me. Both have cost me peace. Maybe one of the greatest acts of grace we can offer another person isn't fixing them. It's refusing to write their story before it's finished. Don't a lot of people do that? Do you do that? Because we all want grace when we're misunderstood. Maybe the first place grace begins is in refusing to judge someone whose battle we can't fully see. The grace we want for ourselves is the grace we're often least willing to give someone else. So welcome back to Cracked Open. I'm Glenn Nunes, and thank you guys for listening. And Cracked Open is the place where we don't pretend to have perfect lives. We simply tell the truth about imperfect ones. And I'm glad you're here. Have you ever noticed how quickly people become judges when someone else's life falls apart? We don't know the whole story. We don't know the years of pain. We don't know the conversations that happen behind closed doors. Yet, somehow, within minutes, we become experts. Social media has made this even worse. One picture, one rumor, one 30-second video, and we've already written the entire verdict about someone else's life. Maybe you've done it. Actually, you know you've done it. I know I have. And maybe someone has done it to you. They decided who you were without even asking what you've been carrying. But the truth is, judging someone requires very little effort. Understanding them requires grace. Today isn't about pretending that right and wrong don't matter, because they do. They're very important. This episode is about something deeper. It's about what happens after someone falls. Do we throw another stone, or do we become the hand that helps them back to their feet? So again, welcome back. And if you're tuning in today, I want to thank you for giving me your time. I haven't missed a single week on this podcast, no matter how heavy the storm has been, because I know someone out there needs room to breathe. Through heartbreak, through depression, through questions, through life in general, and through storms that honestly made me wonder if I had anything left to say. But every Monday, I come back, because someone out there, someone needed a place to breathe. And maybe this week, that's you. Maybe I'm speaking directly to you. Before we dive into the meat of this table tonight, I have to lay down a mind-boggling reality check that happened to me this week. I was listening back to one of my own pre-recorded tracks on a walk, completely uninterrupted. I didn't get any calls or texts. It was beautiful. But later that day, someone I'm connected with, someone who tracks every single episode of this show, they listened to the same exact audio while they were at work. And she called me completely blown away. I could actually tell she had tears in her eyes. She looked at the timestamp of when the episode was locked into the vault weeks ago, and she said, "Wow, Glenn, it's completely eerie. It's kind of like spiritual. The exact breakthroughs, the exact phrases, and the exact coordinates that we just lived through and discussed in our private lives were already mapped out by our voice weeks before they happened. And this isn't the first time this has happened. It happened in a few other episodes. So when you start laying the unvarnished truth down on a microphone, it ceases to be a podcast. It becomes a divine intervention. The spiritual math of this timeline is absolute zero from a human perspective. It is proof that the master pilot is writing the script of our lives before we even live it. So today, as we pull up this chair, we're going to talk about something heavy, something uncomfortable, but also it's something that has the power to completely rewrite the way we love people. Because every one of us eventually stand in that space. The only question is, will we become another stone, or will we become grace? This isn't an episode about pretending sin doesn't matter. It's an episode about remembering that mercy has always changed more lives than condemnation ever has. So what do I actually mean when I say don't judge? Because people hear that phrase and immediately assume it means that we're supposed to ignore right and wrong. But that isn't what I mean. Not judging someone doesn't mean pretending their choices didn't hurt people. It doesn't mean removing consequences. It doesn't mean calling destructive behavior healthy. It doesn't mean allowing someone to keep abusing, manipulating, lying, or taking advantage of you. Grace is not stupidity, and mercy is not permission. Boundaries are not hatred. You can recognize that something is wrong without deciding that the person who did it is beyond redemption. And that is the difference. Judgment says you made a terrible decision, so now I know exactly who you are. And grace says you made a terrible decision, but I refuse to believe that this has to be the final definition of your life. Judgment takes one chapter and calls it the whole book. Judgment looks at someone's worst moment and freezes them there forever. It assumes motives. It fills in missing details. It creates a complete story from one photograph, one rumor, one failure, one relapse, one betrayal, or one bad season, or even one bad decision. And once we've written that story in our own minds, we rarely give the person a chance to become anything else. And that is why judgment can be so dangerous. It doesn't only punish what someone did, it removes the possibility of who they might still become. Now, discernment is different. Discernment says, this is unsafe, this is dishonest, this behavior cannot continue. I love you, but I cannot participate in this. That's wisdom. And judgment goes further and says, you are worthless, you'll never change, you deserve no mercy. There is nothing left in you worth saving. This is who you are. This is your history. This is going to continue forever. And all these crazy things. And maybe the reason we misunderstand this so badly is because condemnation feels powerful. It makes us feel superior. It gives our anger a microphone. It lets us stand above someone else's wreckage and forget how many times that we needed grace when our own life was falling short. The truth is, most people already know when they have failed. They may hide it. They may defend it. They may blame everyone else for a while. But somewhere underneath all of that pride, they usually know. And when that truth finally breaks through, they do not need another person standing over them with a verdict. They need honesty. They need accountability. They may need consequences. But they also need one place where repentance is still possible, because there is a difference between holding someone accountable and holding them underwater. So if that's what judgment is, then why do we do it so easily? Why does it come so naturally to us? Because if we're honest, judgment doesn't just happen by accident. It comes from somewhere. Sometimes it comes from pain. Someone hurt us, betrayed us, lied to us, walked away when we needed them most, maybe weren't there when we needed support from them. And instead of processing that pain, we turn it into a verdict. We decide who they are based on what they did to us. Sometimes it comes from fear. If we can label someone as bad, broken, or beyond help, it creates distance. It makes us feel safer. It convinces us that we are nothing like them, even when deep down, we know we are not as different as we'd like to believe. Sometimes it comes from insecurity. Judging someone else can feel like a shortcut to feeling better about ourselves. If they're worse, then we must be doing okay. If they failed harder, then our failures don't feel as heavy. And sometimes it comes from pride. We forget where we came from. We forget the nights we needed forgiveness. We forget the moments we hoped nobody would define us by. We forget how many times someone chose patience with us when we didn't deserve it. So we stand on a higher ground and we speak as if we never needed grace ourselves. But here's the truth most people don't want to admit. The same human capacity that allowed them to fall, it exists in you too. Different circumstances, different pressures, different timing, but the same humanity. And when you really understand that, something shifts. You stop seeing people as categories. You stop reducing them to labels. And you stop pretending that their worst moment can never be yours. And instead, you start to see them as people who are still in process, just like you. And that doesn't excuse what they did. It doesn't erase the damage. It doesn't remove the need for boundaries or consequences, not at all. But it changes how you carry them in your heart. And that's the most important thing. Because when you understand where judgment comes from, you start to realize something very important. It says more about what's happening inside of you than it does about them. So why do we judge? So why is it that judging another person comes so naturally? Nobody has to teach us how to do it. Children do it. Adults do it. Churches do it. Families do it. Social media has practically turned into a competitive sport. It's sad. One bad decision, one ugly headline, one rumor, one failure, one picture, one 30-second video, and we've already reached the verdict. We don't ask questions. We don't wait for the whole story. We don't wonder what pain that they might be carrying. We simply decide that's who they are. But here's the frightening part. Most of us don't judge because we're evil. We judge because it makes us feel safe. If I can convince myself that your failures are a result of your bad choices, then I never have to consider that under different circumstances. I may have made different mistakes of my own. Judgment creates distance. Grace creates understanding. Now, don't misunderstand me. Grace doesn't ignore truth. And grace doesn't pretend evil is good. Grace doesn't erase consequences. Sometimes people do have to be held accountable. And sometimes trust has to be rebuilt. Sometimes boundaries have to be put in place. That's wisdom. But there is a world of difference between holding somebody accountable and deciding their worst decision is the only thing that they're ever going to be remembered for. Because if God had judged us only by our worst day, where would any of us be? In this episode, it's not about convincing people to excuse sin. It's about convincing people not to give up on people. That's what this episode is about. A few years ago, I heard a story that's never left me. This little boy was sitting on the front steps of his house and he was crying. A man walking by stopped and he said, "Son, what's wrong?" The little boy pointed down at a tiny little bird laying in the grass. He said, "The neighborhood boys were throwing rocks at it, and I tried to stop them, but I was too late." So the man looked down, and the little bird was barely alive. One wing was broken, and it couldn't fly. It couldn't even stand up. So the man bent down, he picked up the little bird as gently as he could, he wrapped it in his jacket, and he carried it home. He gave it water, he cleaned its wounds, and day after day he cared for it until eventually one morning he opened the window and that bird flew away. So I thought about that story for years because every single day we're given one of those two choices. We can become the people throwing stones, or we can become the person who kneels down beside something that's already broken. And here's what I learned. Broken people rarely need another rock thrown at them. Most of the time, they're already carrying enough wounds. So today's topic, the grace is not judging. Let me be clear. We aren't talking about weak boundaries, and we aren't talking about letting people walk all over your peace or compromise your standards. We're defining grace as the radical, quiet, masculine strength that it takes to hold up a sanctuary for someone who is deeply repentant. And that is so important when someone is deeply repentant. And to do it without forcing them to eat the ashes of their past mistakes. And psychologically, why do we want to judge so badly? When someone wrongs us or makes a catastrophic error in judgment, our brain releases a defensive response. The ego craves justice because it feels like validation. But psychological studies on trauma and recovery show that shame never changes a human being. It only isolates them. When a person is trapped in an abusive, manipulative, or toxic cycle monitored by tracking apps and controlled and isolated, their self-worth is already stripped down to absolute zero. And if they try to turn to what's normal and instead they meet a wall of judgment, their brain perceives it as another threat, causing them to retreat right back into the prison. But when they meet zero judgment, the psychological defense mechanisms drop. Healing can finally begin when the terrifying fear of rejection is gone. And I'm going to be completely transparent with you today. This isn't just a theory to me. I'm walking through this fire right now. I know what it's like to watch someone that you love take a brutal, crushing detour. Think about it. If your child was in a situation, even though you want to help them, something out of your power made it so you couldn't, it would drive you crazy. It crushes you. It crushes your spirit. When as I'm saying that, I'm thinking about people in these Dana-Farber and these hospitals where these young children are in situations that aren't good. Maybe they have cancer or they have other medical issues. And as a parent, you can't do anything about it. You pray to God and you plead with him saying, please give this to me. I will deal with the circumstances, but just take it away from my child. And unfortunately, there's nothing you can do. You can't do that. You're not God. So it really hurts. I also want to say energy doesn't lie. I had a conversation recently at one of my gigs, and those of you who don't know me, I'm a musician. So I was at this gig and this gentleman approached me and he said, hey, I was at this local tavern and I witnessed something, this toxic illusion played out right in front of my eyes. He looked me right in the eye and he said, listen, I was out and I ran into somebody and they were with somebody and the entire room felt creepy. He said, I could feel the suffocating manipulation of this person that he witnessed with somebody else. He said, something told me to stay away from his circle, Glenn. And he also said that in the conversation he had, this creep was trying to manipulate and act like he was somebody he wasn't and try to ask him to go to his church and all this other stuff. And I felt strange feeling and I made excuses because I would never go anywhere, never mind a church with this person. He just had an eerie feeling about him. He called him a creep, actually. And then as he was talking to the person that he knew that this person was with, he said he had a conversation with him and the person had told him they were at a family gathering. And as soon as this person walked in, everybody was uneasy, uncomfortable. And he said he had seen pictures of this person on Facebook about this family thing he was talking about. And he said the pictures posted a completely different feeling than what he got when he was around this creep. And the reason I'm mentioning that story is because that's not judgment. That was a feeling that this gentleman got. So he wasn't judging. He was being very honest with me. He actually used that word, says, I hate to judge, but I just had that weird feeling. I just wanted to bring up that point, how to not confuse it with what judging actually is. It's so easy to judge, but it's also good to be aware that discernment and judging are two different things. But we must be careful so we don't confuse the two. So let's talk about the raw power of a single stone. We look at the ancient script of David and Goliath, and we remember the giant standing in the valley, screaming threats, trying to paralyze an entire army with fear. David didn't march down that hill with a massive sword or a battalion of armor. He walked down with a sling and a few smooth stones from the brook. He let one single rock fly through the air, and it struck that giant right between the eyes, crashing his head to the dirt and shifting the entire course of history in a single second. A stone can change everything, and in our personal lives, we carry those exact same weapons in our hands. But there's a massive, dangerous difference between spiritual discernment and human judgment. Just as that gentleman did when he walked up to the stage at my gig recently, and he told me about the encounter with that parasitic manipulator who was trying to play the religious part and trying to use a church structure to a fake transformation. He literally was so serious when he looked at me dead in the eye, and he said, something in my spirit told me to stay away from that building and that creepy soul, and he didn't go to his church or fall for his deceit. So that is discernment. That was God and what some say is the universe giving you an internal compass to protect your perimeter from the counterfeit. But human judgment is when we take our own pain, our own rejection, and we start using it to grind down the character of the people that hurt us. And I'll be completely transparent with you. I caught myself doing this recently myself. When someone had disappointed me and in my mind betrayed me and all my other preconceived notions I had born in my head, my ego, it went into survival mode. I started looking back at her history. She had gone through a very challenging, troubled situation that she personally told me about, and how and why she made some bad choices because of the situation. But because of how judging tastes so good when someone treats us wrongly, or our minds lead us to the easy path of judgment, my pain started whispering lies in my head. I started saying, maybe she made it all up. Maybe it was all her fault. Maybe that's who she was. Maybe she's just always playing the victim. Maybe this is just who she is. Maybe this, maybe that. You see what ego does? It's crazy. When I was on great terms with her, I was completely on her side, holding her with compassion. But the second I wasn't getting what I wanted, the judgment reversed. I took a stone of my own anger, and I tried to hurl it at her past. And that was completely wrong. That is throwing a stone into a wreck that you weren't even there to witness. So discernment protects your future, but judgment poisons your heart. True grace means having the steel to drop the rock even when your ego is screaming at you to let it fly. So that being said, I want to talk about an experience I had. I call it the twin match. I have a bunch of tattoos on me. Both arms are sleeved, and one arm I'm sleeving it with all Jesus parables, miracles, and a religious arm intertwined with memories of my family. But it was so strange. I was talking to someone who's seen a picture of my new tattoos on, I believe it was Snapchat. And she said, wow, those tattoos look amazing. And I told her a story. I said, you know, what's funny is that when I went in for the session, I had 2 other tattoos that we were supposed to do. And the night before I was scheduled to go in for a 6-hour session, I sent my tattoo artist an email and said, hey, I just found a couple of different things. I want to hold off on those 2 tattoos, or there's 3 of them actually, and I got a couple of other things I want to do first. So I sent them to her. So when I went for my session the next day, she walked in and said, that was short notice. I said, I know, but she really got into these tattoos and they came out amazing. And then the tattoos that we were going to do, we scheduled another session and we're going to add those in now. But what's crazy about it, I was having this conversation. She said, what were the other tattoos you were going to do before you changed your mind? I said, one of my next pieces, it's an image, I call it the Peter Rescue. It's where Christ's hand reaches down into the freezing, crashing ocean waves to grab a drowning by the wrist. And it was Peter's. And when I shared that visual, the person on the other end of the line started weeping and just said, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Oh my. I was like, what's the matter? And she told me that for weeks, in the dark, she had been quietly working on a piece of art. And to my surprise, she said, I'm going to send you a photo of this artwork I've been working on. And when she sent the photo, it was the exact identical image of that rescuing hand yanking Peter out of the water. And the percentages of that match are absolute zero. So it was just a divine intervention moment. It was incredible. I am getting that tattoo done in a couple of weeks, and it's something that we're going to hold as a connection together. She actually said that when she finished this piece of art, for some reason, she was just going to put it in the mail and send it to me, which was just crazy. And I just wanted to share that with you because it was just an incredible interaction. And I share that raw miracle with you because when you finally stop trying to be right and you choose to become a safe haven instead, the universe starts aligning signs that human math can't explain. Grace opens doors that judgment completely locks down. And this is not a new spiritual law. It's a timeless human truth that has been altering destinies for generations. And to show you exactly how far back this currency goes, and let me give you a piece of deep historical reality about what happens when you refuse to throw stones. Back in the late 1940s, there was a man named George. He worked as a night watchman at a massive shipyard. One night, he caught a young local kid trying to steal expensive copper wiring out of the supply shed to sell for quick cash. The kid was terrified. He was shaking, and he knew his life was completely over if the police were called. So George had the legal right, the authority, and the absolute proof to ruin that kid's reputation forever. But George looked at the boy's face and he saw absolute terror and repentance. He didn't lecture him. He didn't mock his mistake. He made the boy put the wire back. He looked at him dead in the eye and he said, I'm not telling a soul about tonight. Go home, fix your path, and don't ever let me catch you in this yard again. So 30 years had passed. And after that 30 years, that watchman was elderly, he was retired, and he fell severely ill. He needed an emergency procedure, but the medical bills were staggering, and his insurance wouldn't cover it. So out of nowhere, the chief surgeon at the hospital stepped into his room, patted him on the shoulder, and said, the procedure is already fully taken care of, George. You don't owe a dime, because 30 years ago, you caught some stupid kid stealing wire in a shipyard, but instead of throwing a stone that would have buried him alive, you gave him a safe place to land so he could become the man standing in front of you today. That is the currency of non-judgment. When you withhold a stone, you pave the road for a miracle. That man was his doctor. And years ago, I found myself in a catastrophic situation. I had made a massive error in judgment. I positioned myself around the wrong people, and I got myself into a massive amount of trouble. I was facing a total shipwreck, and I was so overwhelmed with shame and embarrassment that I couldn't even look at my own reflection. I sat in the room waiting for my father to walk in to talk to him about this. My ego was screaming in terror. I thought he was going to disown me. I thought he was going to scream, degrade me, and ask me how could I ever drag the family name into the dirt like this. But the man who walked into that room, he sat flat-footed across from me. He dropped every single stone. He didn't ask for an explanation. He didn't lecture me. He didn't even talk about the situation. He looked me dead in the eye and he said, look, this is a massive problem, but no matter what it takes, we're going to handle it and we're going to figure it out and we're going to get through it and we're going to get to the other side. I was just completely blown away by the radical weight of his grace. And because my father gave me that sanctuary when I did not deserve it, I built my entire relationship with my own kids on that same exact steel. I told my boys their entire lives, I don't care how bad you mess up. I don't care how massive the trouble is. You always call your dad first. and we will handle it together. True authority doesn't crush a broken spirit. It builds a wall around them so they can heal. Right now, I want to move the podcast this way. Imagine a person who spent months building a house out of mirrors. They were convinced it was a palace. They were ignoring everyone who told them that the foundation was shaky. And one day, a storm hit. And this toxic person enters onto the scene and throws a heavy stone at the house. The entire house shatters into 1,000,000 sharp pieces. And that person is now sitting in the ruins, bleeding, surrounded by the broken reflections of their own bad choices. And if you walk up to them and start throwing more stones of judgment, you aren't teaching them a lesson. You are burying them alive. So grace is walking into the wreckage, ignoring the sharp glass, extending your hand and saying, I'm not here to talk about how the house fell. I'm just glad that you survived the crash. And that is grace. In October of 2006, a heavily armed man walked into a tiny one-room Amish schoolhouse in Nickel Mines, Pennsylvania. He lined up the young schoolgirls and he just started to open fire. It's crazy. He killed 5 of them and traumatized an entire community before turning the gun on himself. The world watched in absolute horror, expecting the Amish community to cry out for vengeance, anger, and systemic justice. But what they did instead shocked the whole global media. On the exact same day of the tragedy, while their own children were preparing for burials, the Amish elders walked straight over to the killer's widow and his fatherless children. They didn't cast a single stone of judgment. They didn't shout or blame the family for the actions of that monster. They wrapped their arms around the widow. They set up a charitable fund to help pay for the killer's children's expenses and attended his funeral to offer comfort. They looked at a shattered household and they said, we are not here to talk about how the house fell. We are just glad that you survived the crash. And that is not weak boundaries. That is supernatural human grace. I know some people don't look at it that way and say, how could people do that? But that's exactly why, because it's supernatural human grace. And there's another story in the Bible that captures the heart of grace. I don't think it's Noah, and I don't think it's David, and I don't even think it's the prodigal son. And you've heard me talk about all them in prior podcasts. I think it's a dusty morning when a terrified woman was dragged through a crowd and thrown at the feet of Jesus. She had been caught in adultery. All the religious leaders, they were not interested in helping her. They weren't interested in restoring her. They weren't even interested in justice. They wanted a public execution. They wanted to use her as the weapon. Can you imagine that moment? Just picture yourself in that moment. You're standing there, ashamed, terrified, knowing that every eye in the crowd is looking at you. Every hand is holding a stone, ready to throw it at you. Every whisper becoming another sentence against your life. Then Jesus does something remarkable. He doesn't begin with a lecture. He doesn't begin by defending her. He doesn't begin by attacking the crowd. He kneels down and he starts writing in the dirt. And the Bible, it never tells us what he wrote. And maybe that's intentional, because whatever he wrote, it stopped everyone. Then he stood up and he spoke one sentence that is echoed for 2,000 years. Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone. One by one, the stones hit the ground. The oldest left first, then the youngest, until finally there was no one left, just Jesus and the woman. Then he looked at her and he asked, where are your accusers? And she answered, they're gone. And Jesus said, neither do I condemn you. Go and leave your life of sin. And don't miss what happened here. Jesus never called her sin good. He never said it didn't matter. He simply refused to let her worst decision become her permanent identity. That is grace. It's divine, pure grace. Because the problem with judgment is that we almost always believe we're holding the right stone. We tell ourselves, I'm just telling the truth. I'm just being honest. They deserve it. She deserves it. He deserves it. They made their bed. Let them lie in it. And maybe some of that is true. But have you ever noticed we're usually experts at explaining our own mistakes? But when it comes to everyone else's mistakes, we're prosecutors. When I fail, I want you to understand my circumstances. I want you to know what I'm going through. I want you to hear my side of the story. But when someone else fails, what happens? We often don't even ask a simple question. We just simply write the verdict. And why? Because it's easier to judge someone's chapter than it is to read their whole book. Think about that. It's easier to judge someone's chapter than it is to read their whole book. And the older I get, the less certain I become about people. I've learned that every person that you meet is carrying a battle that you know nothing about. That smiling waitress, that angry customer, the quiet man just sitting alone, the woman that seems to have it all together. You have no idea what happened before they walked into your life. Sometimes the kindest people are fighting the hardest battles. And sometimes the people who hurt others are carrying wounds they've never allowed anyone to see. Again, that doesn't excuse what they did, but it should slow us down before we decide who they are. Because once you really understand your own need for grace, it becomes much harder to withhold it from someone else. And I want you to imagine something right now. A man walks right into your church one Sunday morning. His clothes are dirty. His beard's overgrown. You can tell he's been sleeping in his truck. But he quietly slips into the last row, hoping nobody notices him. Now I want you to imagine another man who walks in. He's got an expensive suit on. He's got the luxury car. He's a successful business owner, very confident. Everyone recognizes him. And I want you to be honest. Which one do people naturally walk toward? Which one gets the warm handshake? Which one gets invited to lunch? Now let me ask you even a harder question. What if I told you that man sleeping in his truck was once the successful businessman? What if I told you he lost his wife to cancer and he started drinking to numb the pain? He lost his company. He lost his house and finally lost himself. Would that change how you looked at him? I think it would. Actually, of course it would. Because the moment we know someone's story, our judgment begins to melt, doesn't it? And that's what compassion does. It fills in the chapters that judgment never bothered to read. And maybe that's why Jesus asked so many questions. He already knew the answers. But he wanted everyone else to slow down long enough to see a person instead of a label. And maybe the greatest act of love is refusing to reduce someone to the worst chapter of their life. And can I ask you something? Who have you already sentenced without ever hearing their whole story? Maybe it's an ex-spouse, an ex-girlfriend, an ex-boyfriend. Maybe it's a parent. Maybe it's a child who walked away. Maybe it's the coworker who hurt you. Maybe it was a friend that you thought was a real friend. Maybe it's someone sitting in church every Sunday pretending they're okay. Or maybe it's you. Because sometimes we're the hardest judge we'll ever meet. Some of us have accepted God's forgiveness, but we still refuse to forgive ourselves. We replay the old failures, the old addictions, the old relationships, the old regrets, the old mistakes. We wake up every morning, pick up the same stone, and we throw it at ourselves all over again. And can I tell you something? If Jesus didn't define Peter by denying him, if he didn't define Thomas by doubting, if he didn't define Paul by persecuting Christians, then maybe, just maybe, your worst decision isn't the truest thing about you either. Maybe God sees the whole book while we're still staring at one page. And maybe the same grace that you're praying God would give you is the same grace he's asking you to give someone else. Okay? I think this is an interesting topic. And before we close today, I want to ask you to do something that might be uncomfortable. Think of one person, just one, And I want you to think of someone that you've already decided isn't worth another chance. I'm not talking somebody that's not a good person or an abusive person that doesn't deserve the chance. I'm talking about someone that you've labeled, someone that you've quietly written off. And I want you to ask yourself, do I know their whole story or just the chapter that hurt me? Because there is a difference. And I'm not asking you to trust someone who's proven that trustworthy. And I'm not asking you to stay in an abusive relationship. I'm not asking you to ignore wisdom or healthy boundaries. I'm not doing that. And I'm also talking about when you know someone's in a situation, but you're just quick to judge them without knowing the whole story. Don't do that. Sometimes love says no. And sometimes grace says, I forgive you, but I can't allow this behavior to continue. Those things can exist together. But what I'm asking is that before you throw another stone, you remember every stone God quietly picked up and removed from your own life. Because every single one of us is standing here today because someone gave us another chance. And maybe it was a parent, maybe it was a friend, maybe it was a teacher, maybe it was a pastor, maybe it was a complete stranger, or maybe it was Jesus himself. And if grace changed your life, don't let judgment become one thing that keeps someone else from changing theirs. Okay? Judgment is terrible, so be careful. The bridge that you burn today may be the bridge someone desperately needs tomorrow. And you know how we do it on this show? We always look at the soundtrack carrying us through the records, right? So when you're talking about the grace of not judging, you need music that matches the weight of the debris, right? I got some tracks that I'm going to add to a playlist in the description below. And just click on the link. There'll be a few songs on there if you feel like hearing the soundtrack that pertains into the Grace and Not Judging podcast. Okay, so click on that link below because we always like to go to music, don't we? Music doesn't wear a mask. It reminds you that the loudest thing you can do when someone is hurting is turn down the judgment and turn up the safety. And as we start to close this out today, I want to speak to the person who's holding a stone right now. Maybe it's against a partner or a friend or a child or your best friend or your forever or even yourself. Drop the stone. It is too heavy for you to carry, and it will not rebuild a single thing that was broken. True maturity is recognizing that sometimes people have to go through the wilderness to realize the value of the home that they left behind. Keep your heart soft, but keep your standards unshakable. When you have survived a catastrophic crash, when your heart has been ripped out of your chest by a brutal separation, or when you're standing next to a friend, like a good friend of mine's mother-in-law, who is weeping because she just lost her husband after decades of being married to him, your entire perspective on reality changes. You quickly realize that nothing else in this life truly matters except the people you love. The petty, stupid, everyday arguments completely vanish. If a bartender mixes you a wrong drink, you don't make a federal case out of it. You just say, thank you, and let them fix it. If your kid forgets to take the trash down to the curb, you don't scream at them. It's just a garbage bag. It'll be there next week, right? When you're operating in true grace, you stop treating minor inconveniences like major crimes. You learn to drop the stones over the little things because life is entirely too short to bleed over sand. It's so true, especially when you lose a loved one. And whether in both cases they may still be alive and you're separated from them, or you lost them physically, both cases are the same. So right now, I think it's a good time to pray. So Heavenly Father, today we come before you not as people who have all the answers, but as people who desperately need your grace. Forgive us for the times that we've been too quick to judge and too slow to understand. Forgive us for the moments that we looked at someone's worst decision and forgotten how many times that you've forgiven ours. Lord, give us wisdom to know the difference between discernment and condemnation. Help us to protect ourselves when we need healthy boundaries, but never allow our hearts to become hard. Teach us to speak truth with love, to hold people accountable without destroying them, and to become safe places where broken people can find hope instead of shame. And Father, if there's someone that we've written off, soften our hearts. And if there's someone that we need to forgive, give us the courage to begin. And if the person that we've been judging the hardest is ourselves, help us finally receive the grace that you've already offered. And thank you for never defining us by our worst day. Thank you for seeing the whole story when we could only see one broken chapter. And may we leave this conversation looking a little bit more like Jesus, who was full of both truth and grace. I pray for every single person listening to the sound of my voice right now, Lord, for the one who is sitting in the ruins of a broken choice. Let them feel your radical, unearned grace today. Wash away their shame. And for the one who's been hurt, give them the supernatural, masculine strength to withhold judgment and hold open the gate. Fill them with peace that surpasses human understanding. Guard their heart, provide for their needs when the bank account looks low, and give them the discipline to keep showing up for their purpose. And in your mighty, holy, precious name we pray. Amen. Before we leave today, I want you to remember one thing. Somewhere this week, someone is going to disappoint you. Someone's probably going to say the wrong thing, make the wrong decision, or let you down. In that moment, you'll have a choice. You can become another voice reminding them of their failure, or you could become the person who reminds them that they are more than their worst mistake. Grace doesn't ease truth. Grace doesn't eliminate consequences. But grace leaves the door open for redemption. And maybe, just maybe, the greatest gift you can give another human being isn't proving that you are right. It's becoming a safe place to land when life has already knocked them to the ground. Keep your heart soft. Keep your standards high. And never forget that the same grace you're praying God will give you is the same grace that someone else may be praying to find through you. So I just told somebody this today that was talking about they were going to straighten their whole life out and then come clean and do this and do that. And I explained to them, I said, no, that's not how life works. You know how it works? You make moves, you make right decisions, you eliminate evil from your life, and then you grow and you do things together. And that's how you do it, one step at a time. So listen to me closely before you step away from the speakers today. If you're the one sitting on your porch with the lights on, or if you're the one walking out of the wreckage right now covered in ash, don't look back at the fire. Look at the grace standing right in front of you. It takes a broken road sometimes to realize where your true sanctuary is. You're not defined by the detour you took, and you aren't defined by the stones that people threw at you. You are defined by the courage it takes to look at a person who loves you and realize you are finally safe. So the door is open. Welcome home. Make the move. You can do it. Okay, and I hope you realize that. So thank you for spending this time with me on Cracked Open. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast, please do. Hit the like button. Please leave a comment. Please share the podcast. And yes, if this conversation made you stop and think, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who might need to hear it, because you never know whose life might change. Okay, and for those of you who have liked the podcast, I appreciate it. And those of you who follow me, and I found out I have a couple of people who've been following me and have listened to every single podcast. 4 people I found this week that told me that, and I was blown away. I didn't even know they were listening. So thank you for that. And for those of you listening, I want to thank you directly, personally. It really means a lot to me. Okay? But as I said, you never know whose life you might change by sharing this with them. and simply because you chose grace over judgment. So until next week, be kind, be honest, be courageous, and remember, everyone you meet is fighting a battle that you cannot see. So until next time, remember that your integrity is your legacy. Treat others how you want to be treated. Karma has no favorites and God has no favorites. And I hope you're on the right side of that. Keep your chin up. Move forward. Make the move. And before you judge someone, let me tell you something I've learned. Before you judge someone, take a look in the mirror. Because today I was talking to somebody who was very concerned about what people are going to think of them. They're making some really important moves right now, and they're more worried about being judged, I think, than anything. And I said, listen, picture somebody holding a mirror, and instead of looking in the mirror, they're looking on the side of it, and they're looking forward to a person, to somebody else, and they're judging them. What they should do is look back in the mirror and look at themselves, because most people don't do that. So I told her, think about that. Don't worry about what people think, okay? And I've learned this as well. Those stones that they're throwing at you should be stones that most people could bang themselves right in the head with it, okay? So keep your chin up. Thank you for rocking out with me in season 3. And no matter what the chaos looks like around you, keep moving, keep loving, and keep choosing grace. I'll see you right back here next week. I love you all. Peace. Have a great week.
Thank you for listening to Cracked Open. If today's episode spoke to you, please share it with someone who might need a little light in their own dark season. Remember, even in brokenness, there's beauty waiting to be found. Every crack is a place where the light can shine through. Until next time, stay true, stay hopeful, and keep your heart open.